We are the Halusa Nation.
Tune into Buland Awaz and The Rational on CFRO 100.5 FM. And, here we are, been around almost that long, well, some of us around longer, on Vancouver's original choice of authentic public affairs content from a people of color perspective. We're always different all the time, broadcasting from the unceded Coast Salish territories on Turtle Island. Find us at www.coopradio.org and at a variety of stops on the internet. And for listeners that want to play along, this week's secret answer is Barat, B-A-R-A-T. You can type that into the subject line of an email to pakoraradio@gmail.com, P-O-K-O-R-A, radio, all one word, at gmail.com, and find out what happens. Buland Awaz and The Rational co-produce critical discussion on relevant issues weekly and often through existential lenses such as: what is Western liberalism's relationship with human bodies of the global majority? And this context very much underlines today's discussions that we will have over the next couple hours. At 6:30 on The Rational, Halina Farikzada, a co-organizer of A Window to an Afghan Heart, which is happening on November 20th, will tell us about that event, that fundraiser. At 6 p.m. on The Rational, Rehab Nazal will talk about On Borrowed Time, an exhibition of drawings and paintings by Palestinian Gaza-based artists happening in the city between November 24th and 27th. 5 p.m. on Buland Awaz, Rukhsar Ali, our resident futurist and scholar of journalism, will talk about film Dune, her review and comments on that. But first, we're going to be joined with Michael Buchert, Vice President of CJPME, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and he will be joining us to talk about the results of a new poll they and a number of national advocacy organizations collectively commissioned, which is on Canadians' attitudes towards Arabs. So this is what we've got lined up for you. Keep staying with us. We're going to take a break and get all that going. Well, if you didn't already know, that was A Tribe Called Red from their Halusa Nation album. As we had promised, we have with us Rukhsar Ali, is a Masters of Journalism candidate at Carleton University with a passion for telling stories through multimedia. They are an artist, a writer, a science fiction enthusiast. They have developed a deep interest in the portrayal of Muslim culture, fiction genres. Their work has appeared across many mediums, from local news publications to global scale projects. Done some really interesting work in their research in futurism, which I'd get into as we move further in this conversation. What was really interesting was their recent article titled, "Here's How the Dune Sequel Can Fix the First Movie's White Savior Problem," where they write, Part 1 erases much of the novel's nuance and cultural significances, but it's not too late to redeem that. So thank you for joining us, Rukhsar.
Hi, thanks for having me.
That's awesome. We're going to talk about this fantastic article that you wrote, but set up for us a little bit of the context of the Dune narrative itself. What's the significance of this piece in popular culture and beyond?
For sure. So Dune is actually one of the fundamental novels people read in science fiction. It was written by Frank Herbert, and it essentially follows this character, Paul Atreides, and he's from this noble family, and his family go to the planet Arrakis, which is this desert planet, and over there's an indigenous race, an indigenous alien race called the Fremen, and essentially the noble families are competing against each other because they want to mine the planet of this special resource, which is spice. And it's really interesting because a lot of it alludes to Middle Eastern political conflict, and a lot of it takes a lot from Middle Eastern culture, from Arab culture, from Islamic culture, and it really builds this really fleshed out world that I think is a big reason why the Dune novel is so successful and is so fundamental in science fiction. People really love how deep the world is.
Well, so tell us a little bit about what that world is in the novel.
Totally. So the Fremen, that are the indigenous race on the planet, they read a lot like Middle Eastern characters, and a lot of their faith as well, which is called Zen Sunnism, or it's a form of Zen Sunnism, is actually inspired by Islam and is inspired by Buddhism. So it's really interesting because a lot of their cultural practices replicate the ones that we see, in our real world from the Middle East.
And so then how are some of these being erased in the films or in the productions that have come since?
Totally. So particularly in this in the latest movie, I found that a lot of the influences and the reason why Herbert's original novel is so loved is because it goes really deep. And I don't think it's necessarily cultural appropriation, which we see a lot nowadays. There's a lot of deep research that went into it, and he really brushed up on his facts, and he developed this deep, deep world with Islamic influences in a way that didn't totally appropriate, it also appreciated. Versus now, the current film does have that element of wiping away all the deep mythology that was created in the book, and you only see Islam, like you see a Fremen character with a tasbih, or you see them chanting similarly, and you see these symbols of religion, but you don't necessarily you don't feel the deep mythology behind it. You don't see the purpose behind it.
So I don't know if through this you got a chance to read Haris A. Durrani's piece on Dune that was published in the Washington Post recently, where he sort of talks about this erasure and in similar ways that you've just described. Although what I liked about your contribution to this discussion was that you've also envisioned how this sad devolution or co-optation or whatever it is of the richness of the original story could be remapped maybe in a more genuine way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure, and I did read that piece. It's really good. But yeah, I think that there are ways that the movie can redeem itself, because now there's going to be a sequel, and I think that to tell the story of Dune, you really do have to do justice to its influences, to its Islamic influences and the Southwest Asian and North African influences, because I think that's the deeper story that's being told. Right now, it really focuses heavily on the character of Paul Atreides and kind of the white characters in the film, and it's doing a disservice to the story of Dune, because Dune is actually a critique of the white savior, which is something I talk about in the article. And I think it can redeem itself, but it needs to make sure that it doesn't shy away from what the source text is inspired by. I think that's a really major key. I think Hollywood can be a little scared to delve into, showing a form of Islam in the future, existing, thriving, and it fears that because it's outside of the norm, it's not your stereotypical portrayal of Muslims as terrorists. You're actually seeing really fleshed out characters, and I think they really need to delve deeper into that and embrace that. For example, in the novel, the terrible purpose in the book for the Fremen and for Paul, the messianic figure, is the jihad. And they explicitly say jihad. Every once in a while they also say crusade, but it's usually referred to as jihad. And I think it complicates what jihad means, because right now jihad has a very negative connotation. And so I think and then in the movie, jihad is not used. That word is completely struck out. In the trailer it was called crusade, but in this movie, you didn't hear it at all. So I don't think that they should fear using those terms and really complicating what Muslims look like on screen.
Well, I hear what you're saying. So here's like a question you can take both ways. So given the damage that I'm calling it, quote unquote, damage that has already been done to the spirit of the original narrative and the complexity of the situation, how would they go about redeeming that? or could they even? Or the other way of looking at the question is, okay, if you were then going to be doing the next production or the sequel, how would be some of the ways that you would go around bringing those elements back into it?
Absolutely. So luckily with the sequel, there will be a lot more focus on the Fremen, and I think really giving time to developing that culture and narratively shifting the focus from Paul, so Timothée Chalamet's character, to Zendaya's character. She plays Chani, and I believe that she will be like the co-protagonist of that film. And I think that's a great step already because it's her story that needs to be told. It's the Fremen story that needs to be told. It can't just focus on Paul, on Timothée Chalamet's character, because that is the quintessential white savior story. So I think that's already a step in the right direction, is that they have that intention to shift that focus. And then another thing I think that they could do is hire like Muslim and Southwest Asian and North African characters or actors to play the Fremen characters, because that's originally what they were inspired by. I think that's a huge missed opportunity. There was not a single Muslim or SWANA actor hired in this film. They actually ended up they did hire other, character actors of color, but they did swap people out, and they treated minorities as interchangeable, which you can't do. It's really irresponsible when Frank Herbert was so committed to enhancing the cultural influences in his novel, to then not hire actors who resemble those characters. So I think that would be another huge step, is that when they depict Fremen characters, they really should consider who they're casting for those roles.
Well, sure, fair enough. Though I wonder how the sequel might take the lead character then and basically co-opt them into the narrative structure that they're already creating.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see that too. I wonder how the narrative will shift, given that this movie was very heavily focused on Paul's journey. I kept waiting. I wanted to see the Fremen, because that's what I personally loved so much about the novel, was seeing like this Islamic culture in this future world. It's 20,000 years in the future, and Islam, or a form of Islam, is thriving. And I just thought that was so unique and so interesting. And hearing the Arabic terms. But yeah, I do think that was missing, and I think that would be really interesting to see going forward how that plays out.
I do too. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic. I know that the folks that are going to be going ahead and producing the next film will be paying attention to the public discourses around how their film has been received. But it just seems like if they've already decided from the get-go to be so averse to any elements of Muslimness or Islam coming into it, going as far as they have, how they would be able to shift gears. I mean, it'd be awesome if they did. It's just really curious for me. But you know what? These are large questions we don't have the answers to. We're not in their heads, as it were. And I just wanted to shift gears a little bit with you, if you didn't mind. I wanted to just ask you if you could maybe introduce me, our listeners, to some of the work that you've done around futurism.
Oh, totally. So I am presenting at a conference, one of a first of its kind of conference on Muslim futurism next year. And I'm so excited that we're starting to explore this idea, because I think Muslim futurism is something that is so natural, but we've never really thought of it that way. And so definitely a lot of work around imagining what a Muslim future looks like. And I think that's something that we should be asking ourselves, especially now, given that, Muslims tend to be, have been viewed, particularly in Hollywood and generally in our society, as of the past, or this archaic kind of faith or culture. But I think, Muslims exist now, Muslims exist in the future, and it's a great question to ask, is how do we want to be viewed, but also how we view ourselves. And I think it's a really good response to Dune as well, because although Dune does give some kind of representation to Muslims, it wasn't written by a Muslim author, and it wasn't written from this more Muslim perspective. And so it's really, really cool to start thinking about what Muslims look like in the future, in an inclusive environment, how we thrive, that kind of thing.
So talk a little bit more about then your positionality or perspective, or how are you approaching this large question? What is your particular sort of interest or take on this big question? What is the work that you've been doing around futurism is I guess another way of asking the same question.
For sure. So I always love to approach this question from a science fiction perspective. As a Muslim, as a science fiction enthusiast, it's very obvious to me that most of the science fiction canon is white. It's white, it's male. If you have people like characters of color, they're side characters, or they fall into these tropes that we've seen time and time again. So science fiction particularly is very white. So I always want to see, where is that not happening? And interestingly enough, there's a lot of, Middle Eastern science fiction that is so interesting, but it's not as well known as the canonical science fiction text in Western literature. But it's doing that work. It's bringing Islam into the future in a way that is fair, in a way that asks really, really tough questions and important questions. So no longer do we have to look to Dune as our one Islamic representation in sci-fi. So that's the kind of thing I like to do. And then I particularly have written, I've written a paper that is the one I'll be presenting at the conference, specifically looking at Ahmed Sadawi's Frankenstein in Baghdad, which is a really great text. It's a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and so in the Middle Eastern context. And so what I'm doing with that paper is I'm taking Sadawi's text and I'm using it to further analyze Mary Shelley's text, because I think that going the other way can really inform us a lot about, what Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was also talking about. And I think it's wonderful to start exploring things from a Middle Eastern epistemological lens as well, which I think is something that's been, really missing in literature studies.
That's brilliant. That's awesome. And so if folks wanted to know more about your writings and things, are they available to them somewhere in some space on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. I post links to all my work on my social media. So it's at Rukhsar, RUKHSAR XALI, Ali, on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay, so part of my sort of homework and researching around the works of my guests, I came across something around, it was titled Muslim Futurism, The Aliens Are Coming and They're Reclaiming the Narrative. And I just really quickly went through that, but you were involved in that. Was it a piece that you wrote, or was it a conference that was happening? What was that all about?
Yeah, so I wrote that piece for the Arts Commons blog. Arts Commons is a performing arts company in Calgary.
Okay, and folks can also read that at your blog, or where did they go for that? It's at artscommons.ca in any case. So that's where I found it, at the artscommons.ca blog.artscommons.ca.
Yeah, and in that text, I'm primarily talking about how Muslims have reclaimed the kind of alien. So it was actually a direct response to Dune as well. How Dune depicts, as much as I love Dune, it is still depicting Muslims as aliens, and that is still problematic. And that's something that, we're starting to see us counter. And I think we're taking that alien narrative in a lot of ways, and I think we're starting to really counter it. For example, one of the performers I give as an example in that piece is Rukhsar Ali, who is a queer drag queen in the States, who does really wonderful work around envisioning a queer Muslim future and asking those really important questions of where are queer Muslims in society. What is how do they fit into a future, into an inclusive future? Definitely, really great questions to ask right now.
Oh, right. I mean, totally, because what a double question, because here they're not even perhaps respected, situated appropriately within Muslim cultures themselves, and really have an interesting dynamic because it's thousands years old history. It's in the culture in any case. Thank you so much for taking this time out and joining us for the first time on the program, writing the article that you did, and talking it through with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Alnoor. This was really fun.
Awesome. Take care. That's the show where we spoke with Michael Buchert from the CJPME, the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, on their new report on the Canadians' attitudes towards Arabs. We then spoke with Rukhsar Ali on their article titled "Here's How the Dune Sequel Can Fix the First Movie's White Savior Complex." That's available on the CBC network. We switched over onto The Rational and spoke with Rahab Nazal on a really funky exhibition here in town, catch it while you can, called On Borrowed Time in Gaza, Art in Confinement. It's happening at the Monica Rice Gallery from November 24th to the 27th, with a walkthrough on Saturday, November the 27th. And then we just spoke with Halina Farrokhzada on a fundraiser gala dinner titled A Window to an Afghan Heart. Please check out the two festivals, the fundraisers, the Borrowed Art in Confinement and A Window to an Afghan Heart. Check out as well Rukhsar Ali's article, Here's How Dune Sequel Can Fix Its First Movie's White Savior Problem. And also check out the CJPME website and find a copy of their new report on Canadians' attitudes towards Arabs. So, as I said, we're going to leave you with John Trudell. Take care until next week. Hang in there.
We are going through an identity crisis as human beings.